Blessed is he who in the prime of his youth and the heyday of his life will arise to serve the cause of the Lord of the beginning and of the end, and adorn his heart with his love. The manifestation of such a grace is greater than the creation of the heavens and of the earth. Blessed are the steadfast, and well is it with those who are firm. Baha'u'llah. Wherefore, O ye illumined youth, strive by night and by day to unravel the mysteries of the mind and spirit, and to grasp the secrets of the day of God. Inform yourselves of the evidences that the most great name hath dawned. Open your lips in praise. Adduce convincing arguments and proofs. Lead those who thirst to the fountain of life. Grant ye true health to the ailing. Be ye apprentices of God. Be ye physicians directed by God, and heal ye the sick among humankind. Bring those who have been excluded into the circle of intimate friends. Make the despairing to be filled with hope. Waken them that slumber. Make the heedless mindful. Such are the fruits of this earthly life. Such is the station of resplendent glory. Upon you be Baha'u'llah. Abdul Baha. I strongly urge you to devote, while you are pursuing your studies, as much time as you possibly can to a thorough study of the history and teachings of our beloved cause. This is the prerequisite of a future successful career of service to the Bahá'í Faith, in which I hope and pray you will distinguish yourself in the days to come. Shoghi Effendi.
So today our speaker is Mr. Peter Gottert, and his topic is Exploring Adolescent Pathways to Spiritual Growth. Peter Gottert has worked with public health programs in Africa for 4 decades. He has lived in Benin, Madagascar, and Ethiopia for 30 years. From 2002 to 2009, Peter co-designed life skills programs for Ethiopian and Malagasy high school and university students, as well as out-of-school youth. Many insights gained during that period are also applicable to fostering adolescent spiritual growth, a critical issue of our time. Peter has a BA from Brown University and an MA in communications from Antioch University. So with that, I'll hand it off to Mr. Gottert.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. Well, I am delighted to have been invited to present during this fireside. I think it's just an excellent initiative, and it really did absolutely correspond with a time when I was becoming increasingly interested in adolescent pathways to spiritual growth, and I'll explain why. First of all, my daughter had given me a book by Lisa Miller called The Awakened Brain. That was just exceptional. I mean, there were just so many interesting ideas. She is a psychologist up at Columbia University, and she describes her realization that spirituality, we are hardwired as human beings for spirituality. And she says, well, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a pastor, I'm not a priest, I'm a scientist, and this is what data is telling me. And then from there, I started to read, actually an earlier book called The Spiritual Child, The New Science of Parenting and Health for Lifelong Thriving. And she, although the picture on the cover is of a young child, she really spends a lot of time describing what she calls the second decade. And she says it's a time of exceptional spiritual growth. And I cannot recommend these books more highly because there's so many new, wonderful ideas in them. The second sort of convergence of my interest in this field is that my own grandchildren are entering that second decade. And some of them are still younger, but they're getting older. Fortunately, of course, I'm not getting any older. Neither is my wife. This is it's just an area of where grandparents want to be very active and provide the right support. The third area, third area is the realization that parents at this point are very eager to fill this missing gap in their children's education, this gap of spiritual growth and spiritual understanding. This is a photo of my daughter's children's class, just a few. There are more girls that participate. They're all friends and they all come from absolutely diverse backgrounds. Every imaginable, I mean, you could not get a group of 8 girls together that represented greater diversity. But the parents have been so supportive and so interested and so eager to help out. So that's been a real wonderful point of light. And the final, of course, convergence is the continual encouragement that we get from the international governing body of the Bahá'í Faith, the Universal House of Justice. Just this past April, their letter, two quotes from their letter are, amid all we have described, the actions of the youth shine resplendent, where a community has seen them in this light and created conditions for their progress. The youth have more than justified the confidence shown in them. So I'm going to ask you, I should have said this earlier, I'm going to ask you to all get a piece of paper and a pen, because we're going to be exploring these pathways together. And we all have to work a little bit and to make our discoveries. And here's the first question for you. I want you to just think about what a reasonable vision might have been for you. If you're like me, you say, you know, I did not have any vision of spiritual growth when I was 11 years old. But just try to imagine yourself at that time, or if you're an adolescent now, think back to when you were 11 and or you can do it actually at your current age. What might be a reasonable vision for spiritual growth, achievable by the time you're 20 years old? Let's just take 2 minutes, and please, everybody, take your pen and write something down on a piece of paper. We've learned that helps. We know that helps learning. So I'll just give you 30 seconds to do that. Think back. Okay, now moving on, we're going to go, when I reflected on the little I have learned, what I've learned, of course, it all comes from Africa and the wisdom of Africa. So here are a few notes from the field. My family lived in Benin in West Africa from 1972 to 1990. There was a wonderful Baha'i community there, really very supportive. This is a photo that was taken in 1979, I'm sorry, of the National Spiritual Assembly. At that point, my children were born there. This is my daughter right in the middle. My son, Colby, was also born there. I started my profession that it's been close to 40 years in health communications there. But what I really want to speak about with respect to Benin is a mini pilgrimage that I took. I returned to Benin 2 years ago, just in December. And I spent a lot of time in the south here, but I also went up to the central part of the country in Parakou, and also traveled to Niki. And Niki is it's one of the, I'm going to say 10, 15, 20 gold mines or towns of gems, beautiful areas of the world. From Niki, the small town or larger village, have come legions of 3 generations of extremely dedicated, active Baha'is that are serving in administrative posts throughout West Africa, and really just rendering great service to humanity. So I went there and I asked them, I was curious, what's your secret? Tell me what you did so wonderfully right. And I sort of triangulated with maybe 6, 7 different people my age and younger people and even children. And this is what emerged after 3 days of discussion and participating in activities with them. They said, and I think this is a foundation for all religious and spiritual growth. That's why I'm mentioning it here. They said, we saw our parents love the faith. So, of course, this was the Baha'i faith, but it could be any faith. If you see their parents love the faith, then they said, our parents included us in all activities. This wasn't a question of dropping us off someplace and doing their activities and we did something else. We were always, it was always part of who we were. Thirdly, they said, according to our age, our parents gave us appropriate responsibilities. So if they were in a youth class, they had the possibility to become a co-facilitator, or they had the possibility to start a children's class or do any number of things. Their parents were always gently encouraging them to take those responsibilities. Fourth, and when I say this, I have a big smile on my face because it's in Western families, it's quite difficult, but they said, we said morning prayers together. And I know many houses are quite confusing in those early morning hours when kids are trying to get off from school, but there are ways I've seen for families to approach this. And finally, what I call the Jamile principle, I was able to participate in a spiritual feast during my stay in Nikki. And by the way, Doug Smith, who actually opened that, who taught the faith first to friends in Nikki, is on this call. And I'm thrilled with that. And the Jamile principle is during the spiritual feast, a 10-year-old girl during the consultative part raised her hand, and she suggested that their children's class go to the neighboring town and visit the two children's classes that were there. And immediately an adult, probably an older person like about my age, raised their hand and said, no, that's cost too much money. You can't do that. And you can imagine that. Then other members of the community stepped forward and said, no, let her explain why she wants to do this. And Jamile stood her ground, and she explained why this was important for her children's class to meet other children and to see them and be with them. And I just left amazed because I saw that she was a full-fledged 100% member of this community, even at 10 years old. She wasn't a child that was sent off. She was participating actively. So that was very impressive to me. Moving on with my little family history, we came back to the States and then went out to Madagascar in 1996. And I was working with a health project. Again, the Malagasy community, the overall culture is very beautiful, very warm. It's intertwined with music and dance and song. People are very hospitable, very friendly. And the Baha'i community, again, reflected that. It was just wonderful to be with them. And my kids were teenagers at that point. And I realize now that they benefited from that warm, supportive, artistic culture. Finally, the final stop in this sort of little background and warm-up is Ethiopia. That's from just recently. My wife and I were there. My kids were already grown and married. So again, Ethiopia Baha'i community is so exceptional. It's so wonderful. It's just, anybody who's been there just stands in awe of them. They are so dedicated, so lively. I just could go on and on. I was working there for 8 years. I lived there for 6 years, but traveling back from Washington back and forth for at least 2, maybe more, with youth programs. So I just realized, really, just for preparing this presentation, I realized, well, you worked with youth for 8 years. You should have learned something, and I did. But they were high school, universities students, out-of-school students, and high-risk students, high-risk youth, I should say. One of the things we used a lot was theater or role plays, and we all learned very quickly that their power for bringing home a point or impressing or bringing the emotional context of a situation to bear was unprecedented. It was just wonderful. And over the years that we worked with these programs, with various processes, sort of dicing and reassembling and looking at them from all different perspectives and having youth vote on them and discuss these, we came up with 5 life skills. Again, I think these life skills are applicable to youth around the world. And in fact, I've asked adults, I said, well, when I'm trying to sort of sell the programs, could you use these life skills yourself? And they all shake their heads, yes, of course we could. So the 5 are making good decisions, learning basically what goes into a good decision, increasing self-confidence. I used to ask the youth in these various groups, who would like to have greater self-confidence? Of course, everybody's hand went up. Everybody would. Setting achievable goals or manageable goals, realistic goals, resisting peer pressure, always a big one for any society, for any group, and knowing where to find sound advice and services when you have a problem or difficulty or just need a shoulder to lean on or somebody to talk to. So that sets the stage. That's all background. And this is the glass that I want to talk about. The first decade here is the glass is now half full. And in my experience as a grandparent and looking around broader to children that I see in various religious communities, in many cases, in the cases I know most best, the families are engaged. There's a lot of community support. The virtues classes are wonderful, very active, and so forth. And so there's a real solid foundation, shall I say, in this glass. The glass is definitely half full at 10 years. Now we want to fill up the glass for the second decade, and that's where we have to work more, I believe, and I'm putting forth as a sort of exploration on spiritual skills. And I wanted to speak specifically about 3 spiritual skills: personal prayer, art, and social action. And we want to explore together, this is where we're going to have you working a little bit more here, pathways for spiritual growth and flourishing. We just don't want the children to just grow well. We want them to flourish. We want them to really, from 10 to continue to sprout more leaves and then to blossom. And then, of course, even before they reach their second decade, to begin to yield fruit and serve others. So I'm calling them pathways. You might think of them as entry points or gateways. Of course, there are other pathways, there are other entry points, there are other gateways, but I'm just picking these 3 because of, again, this personal background that I have. They're connected. There's interplay with all 3 of them. Let's look first at personal prayer briefly. Here's a quote from the New Testament. "Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours." So again, this prayer is cross-cutting. It's a part of every religious tradition. And this idea of belief or faith is fundamental to personal prayer. Here's another quote. There's so many beautiful quotes. I had a really difficult time choosing the ones I like the best. "Prayer does not change God, but it changes him who prays." So this is what we're looking for in the youth, of course. We're looking for that inner change. We're looking for personal prayer. Here's another one. "Prayer should not be regarded as a duty which must be performed, but rather as a privilege to be enjoyed, a rare delight that is always revealing some new beauty." And finally, from the Baha'i Faith, Abdul Baha writes, "There is nothing sweeter in the world of existence than prayer. The most blessed condition is the condition of prayer and supplication." Now, with your pens and pencils, I'm going to give you a little bit more time. I want each of you to think, either as a youth yourself or as a parent or a grandparent or a friend or a supportive member of the community, what you would consider a reasonable goal for an adolescent to achieve, a manageable goal, an achievable goal with regards to personal prayer. And then I want you to think about the stepping stones, the spiritual stepping stones that might help you get to that goal. So, for example, I'm just putting one here that I feel is important. It's learning prayers by heart, only because if you don't recite the prayers you learn by heart, you forget them. So it's a real encouragement to recite them and to keep them close to your heart and so forth. So I want you to take a minute right now with your pen and paper. Please write it down, what you think a reasonable goal would be for you as a youth, or for your child, or for your grandchild to achieve by the time they're 20 years old in terms of personal prayer. And write the stepping stones, one or two, that you think would be important. Okay, we can move on now. Okay, let's speak about art. Here's a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Every artist was first an amateur. I put this up here because just on Thanksgiving, I was speaking to a friend, and he's a teacher, and he was describing a situation where youth get discouraged. He teaches adolescents. He says youth get discouraged if they're not the best. He said if they can't be the best, they don't want to do this. So we're talking about art from an entirely different perspective. We're talking art from a perspective of inner joy, of personal freedom, of growing confidence, of achieving your own voice, if you will. Here it's quite literal, but just knowing what your inner self is speaking about. A good example of that is dear Bahá'í friend Thelma Kilgatti invited us to a memorial service for her son and daughter's dance teacher. She's held a service in Washington, and the dance teacher lived in Massachusetts. And to a person, everybody just explained what a wonderful, gifted teacher she was, and how she inspired confidence and creativity and unity and love. And I just thought, my goodness, what a gift for this family to have such a wonderful teacher guiding their children for several years. And one of the son, Samandar, said, well, we always used to, we'd go from soccer practice right over to dance class and not think anything about it and just enjoy both of them equally. So that's one sort of end of the spectrum. Another, unfortunately, is just last week we were talking with friends, and I was asking, sort of exploring for this particular presentation. I said, tell us about your daughter's interest in Irish dancing. And they said, oh yeah, well, she was very enthusiastic, and she participated for 3 years, and then she was doing so well that people suggested that she move up to a different class. And it turns out this was a competitive class, and suddenly the whole atmosphere changed, and it was very rigorous, and it was very intense and stressful. She dropped out. So she loved this art. It was really helping her and guiding her, but she got into a competitive mode. And so that's not what we're talking about. And that's something that, of course, is always sort of around the edges of artistic activities here in the States. So here's some more quotes. The arts are not expendable, they are essential, and I would add, for spiritual growth, for inner well-being. The creation of beauty is art. And here again, the Baha'i faith places enormous importance on the arts. Abdul Baha said that all art is a gift of the Holy Spirit. When this light shines through the mind of a musician, it manifests itself. Excuse me, I'm blocking my own screen here. It manifests itself in a beauty of harmonies. And then he goes on to speak about poetry as well. So here's your second or third task. Please think of a manageable, achievable goal for adolescents, a specific adolescent you might know, with respect to the realm of art and their inner understanding of an artistic expression, any artistic expression, and then try to describe one or two spiritual stepping stones that might help them achieve that goal. I'll give you a minute. Please, again, use your pen and just write it down on paper. Okay, third, social action. Life is for service. This is our old friend, Mr. Rogers here. Okay, let's start with tree planting, environmental action. A group from, I had the pleasure of participating in a group tree planting activity with a group of youth from Columbia, Maryland, Baha'i youth, just this early October. And they had come already 3 or 4 times. And it was wonderful to see when the group leader started to ask questions about the why and wherefore tree planting. They were right up, raising their hands, answering correctly. And I could see that they were already developing into social activists, if you will. They were already taking a leadership role, and they were in great contrast with other youth that were there that were just merely completing service hours for high school. So I'm proposing, since environmental climate change, environmental action is in the forefront of news and the education of our children and our youth, that if our communities and our families do not actively engage in this, they are sending a negative message to their own youth. If you see this around you all the time and there's things you can do and you don't do anything, what is the message? I don't think it's positive. Here's a quote from Hinduism that speaks about the social action. The essence of Hinduism is the same essence of all true religions: bhakti, or pure love of God, and genuine compassion for human beings. Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world. This is from the Jewish tradition. If you see what needs to be repaired and how to repair it, and then you have found a piece, then you have found the piece of the world that God has left for you to complete. But if you only see what is wrong and what is ugly in the world, then it is you yourself that needs repair. Finally, it's not how much we give, but how much love we put into giving. From the Baha'i writings, be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. Baha'u'llah. So again, please take a minute, take your pen and pad, and think of a achievable, manageable, reasonable goal for youth in their second decade of life with respect to social action, and think of practical spiritual stepping stones that will help them achieve that goal. I'll give you a minute again. Okay, now to wrap up. So what role can parents, coaches, family, teachers, how can they provide support? What role can they play? Well, one of the areas I think that they can be most helpful in is what I'm calling this is creative mixing. So there's an intersection between prayer and art. In fact, we actually saw that in the musical selection before we started. So these intersections are very exciting. There's one between art and social action, of course. We've all seen this take place, and between personal prayer and social action. So this is something I think that parents and youth teachers and communities themselves can help foster because sometimes it takes a little bit sort of a coordination, logistics, funding, and so forth. But we've all participated in these one way or another. And I just want you to each think back, take a few seconds and think back of a time where you were part of an activity that combined any two or all three of these particular spiritual skills: personal prayer, art, and social action. So here's some few quotes with respect to that. Prayer in action is love. Love in action is service, from Mother Teresa. That is, we don't know where one ends and the other starts. They're all mixed. And this is why we're talking about these different entry points, because for an adolescent, they want to move between these freely, and they're all mutually supportive, and they're all mutually, in a sort of a virtual ascending cycle. Every artist dips his brush in his soul and paints his own nature into his paintings. Prayer changes everything to beautiful. These are all, there's lots of wonderful quotes. I enjoyed picking these out. So here's a second question. How can parents, family, teachers provide support? And I'm calling this creative encouragement I love the term, but it's because I'm not sure. This is a little bit harder. We've all learned and we're all sort of getting better at practicing reinforcing virtues that we see in our children. Just yesterday, I was telling my daughter that how Ian, my 4-year-old grandson, Leslie, and our grandson, shared his cookie with me, and his sister shared it with her father after a hike last week. And I just say Ian was so generous, and I was so happy that he shared that cookie because I was really hungry, and he lit up. He just lit up. He was so proud. So that's I see that personally as very positive, but relatively easy compared to providing creative encouragement at just the right time during adolescence. Because again, personal prayer is something very, very private. And it's just hard to know how to approach that. Art that can be the same thing. Again, one of my grandchildren, this is new territory. She was drawing something and I came up and she said, "Oh, don't look, it's not good." Oh my goodness. I said, wow. And I didn't know what to say. And a friend I had, again, he explained missing an opportunity to really sort of engage and encourage creatively just like 2 weeks ago. So this is new territory, I think, for a lot of parents, a lot of teachers. And I would like you to ask you to think or try to remember a time when you benefited from creative encouragement. That was somehow the right words from the basketball coach or your auntie came at just the right time, and they sort of propelled you forward. So just take 15 seconds and sort of close your eyes and see if you can remember something that really was formative. And finally, in this area of parents and family and teachers providing support for personal prayer, art, and social action, we want to surround this whole everything, the interactions, the skills themselves, with light. And I think the best way to surround them with light is fostering what I call aha moments. We know what an aha moment is. It's like suddenly you have an insight. It's like, I get it now. Now I understand. Now it's really part of who I am. It's part of me. And so here's just a short list. There are numbers of ways you can do this. Memorable activities. So I would say every virtues class and every youth class and junior youth class, 1 or twice a year, do something very special with the class so that that's memorable. So it's different, and it's like we did something that was really so cool and wonderful during that class, and we learned so much and we bonded together. The other is the family initiatives, and again, the Bahá'í family taking this initiative to start these firesides during the pandemic, I think, is a perfect example. They're working as a family, they're working together. Each has different responsibilities. So that is really great and wonderful. I think every family has to think in those terms. Third, what I'm putting here is spiritual adventures. Traveling to some of these countries and visiting Baha'i communities or religious communities of any nature can be a real adventure in every aspect of that word, every possible aspect. So I would think that families would want to sort of program that in and say, maybe not every year, you can't afford to do it, we don't have time, but certainly in that 10-year span of adolescence, we would want to do that several times, have several family spiritual adventures or community spiritual adventures or youth group spiritual adventures. And finally, a year of service, that can obviously be very formative and wonderful. And I think we've all seen examples of that. So that's, in fact, it's a really a bold statement of where your priorities are and that you have really the spiritual adventure is well on its way. So just 2 more slides. I was going to go off mute or have conversations now about what we've done, but I'll just finish up here and then we'll have some discussion. So again, think for 15 seconds or maybe more. Do you recall an aha moment from your adolescence? This is an aha moment with respect to spiritual growth. Really can be anything. It can be small, large, at any aspect of improved well-being. You might want to think about what were the circumstances that produced that? So finally, to wrap up, we want to fill the glass during adolescence. And here we are, we're at 10 years and we're going to fill the second part. So here's just my own ideas when I did the exercises myself. I came up with personal prayer leading to trust in God. If an adolescent had really strong trust in God at the end of adolescence, that would be a victory. Confidence, enthusiasm, love of life through art. Again, it's a very personal, interior understanding of art and personal expression, voice. Social action engendering commitment and leadership. I think all youth that have commitment naturally will become leaders because their peers look at them and say, wow, where did this come from? And finally, I'm going to say 3 to be modest, maybe 1's enough. Experiencing, try to foster as a grandparent 3 aha spiritual moments during that 10-year period. So they don't happen ever frequently, but when they do happen, they're very significant. So if we put them all together, I would like to submit that the glass will not only fill up, but overflow, and that at the end of adolescence, youth will be able to, this is the tablet of visitation of Abdu'l Baha at the end of it. And if youth could recite this with true inner conviction, it would be, that's a huge victory. So I'll just read it to wrap up. With this prayer doth thy servant call thee at dawn time and in the night season. Fulfill his heart's desire, O Lord. Illumine his heart, gladden his bosom, kindle his light, that he may serve thyself and thy servants. Abdu Baha. Thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation. And if we have time, we can go back and talk about our goals and stepping stones and visions and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was really great. Thank you. So yeah, we have some time for questions now, so people can put their questions into the chat and I can read them. Or
maybe I should we'll put your questions in and then we'll see if anybody has any comments on goals and stepping stones. That I'd be very interested. Again, since we're eager to learn about these from everyone else.
Okay, we have a question. What do you suggest about how to increase youth involvement in service projects in different communities?
Okay, we'll start there. That's a perfect, wonderful question. It's just like jump in with both feet. Again, the youth coordinators in Columbia, Maryland, who came with their youth and with their families to plant trees in October. And this is, again, the third or fourth trip for most of these youth. They're walking the walk, walking the talk themselves. And once the youth start to do that, they realize this is doable. This is not difficult. My favorite quote from tree planting is a Bahá'í friend from inner city Baltimore who came out and said, "It's so easy." He had been hearing about all sorts of difficulties and threats from climate change, from people who were very experienced and very knowledgeable. And now he's out digging holes in the ground, putting the tree in and backfilling the dirt. And he realizes, I can do this. I can do this just like everybody else. So we've seen that once the youth do it once, their learning curve is very rapid. So it's like getting them out. Like, let's get in the car and do it together now. And once they get that, they break that ice. The second time, the third time, progressively becomes easier and easier. And this transition to becoming social activists, when I mean in the most positive sense, occurs very quickly. It doesn't take that much time.
We have a comment, getting close to nature gives a feeling of nearness to God. Doing an art project, painting a mural together, planting a kitchen garden or a community garden.
Yes, totally agree. Yes, totally agree. Totally agree. That's exactly it. That's yeah. So we want to, again, put that as a stepping stone, as a community, as a family, as a virtues class, or as a youth class. We want to make sure that we have this happen. I'm going to say twice a year. Should be more. Might be every class, every month, but I'm going to be really modest and say twice a year would be good. Again, this intersection. This is Dora speaking about the intersection of art and painting the mural. I mean, I had you painting a mural out in nature, but I guess you are. Anyway, that's all very positive. Okay. Thank you.
The next question is, do you think the best is having grandparents, parents, and children, all three, involved in the development of the family, thus the first unit and unity in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. The families, the parents are, they're role models, and they're the light, and they're providing the example. But yet, still at this second decade in adolescence, we all know that the parents have to be there and then not there at the right time as well. So because you're trying to foster independence, you're trying to foster greater responsibility. And I mean, my generation is the generation of the helicopter parents, which might have become even more intense in this coming generation, this current generation. So it's a different dynamic, but most certainly families have to be out there, groups have to be out there, virtual, everybody at every point has to be out there. Yeah, so thank you, Leslie. It's in the comment in the chat. So, for example, the Baltimore cluster, the Baha'i community, Baltimore City and the surrounding county has been, again, people know I'm like, I love tree planting. We've been doing it we're in our 4th year now. We provide 10 volunteers 3 times in the fall and 3 times in the spring. That's 60 volunteers. But the key is we're working with a local NGO, and there are local NGOs all over the country now. If you Google local NGO for tree planting, you will have 5 or 6 choices. You just look at their calendar. They're asking for volunteers. You sign up, you go out. They give you the training. They give you the tools. They have picked the spot. They have the trees. They even have picked where the trees are going to go. All they need is the heavy lifting. Dig the hole, plant the tree, protect the tree. And we've seen, again, the youth, it's very dramatic, an open field, and 2.5 hours later, it's covered with 125 trees. It's very impressive how working as a group and how working as a community. So I would say, again, getting your hands dirty is indispensable, because otherwise we're giving a negative message to our families and communities and to our youth. Well, that's another Doris. Doris says we need water on trees in Arizona. Yeah, here's hot summers and yeah. Again, with the local NGOs, they're experts in this area, and they do that. They help out with that, and they understand. And the key is not how many trees you planted, but how many trees survived 5 years later. And they have maintenance programs, watering programs. They're proud of their rate, which is like the average is about 80%, and they're up above at like 92%. So that's a very high percentage of success. So that also, again, it's the same thing. It sends the right message when you plant the tree, and then you make sure that the tree survives and thrives, just like we want our youth to do. Well, thank you for attending, and I hope that, like I mentioned at the outset, just preparing for this presentation it allowed me personally to explore, and I am very grateful for that, because I think this is an area where there's huge concern among parents, and any parent that says, I'm not nervous, or a grandparent that says, I'm not nervous or concerned, I think is, wow, that's, I'd like to meet that person. Because the pressures are intense, and yet we have the tools to do a good job, and we just have to be, I think, very on top of that task, if you will. Yes, it's true. Every one of us can be a tree rescuer by completing the training. So everybody's very happy with this social action. How about art and personal prayer? I think the 3 are working together. The personal prayer is very, very, very private. Art is interesting. If you think about it, art is interesting because it's very private, but it can also be social. The social action definitely gets us in touch with the community and large.
Well, thank you so much. That was great. We really appreciate it. And this talk will be up on YouTube next week, so people can rewatch and share with people who couldn't attend. And our speaker next week will be Colby Gottert, and the topic is, I'm an artist and a scientist. This is why God matters to me. So again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time, and I'll put the link to our contact form on our YouTube channel in the chat. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again.